wonderful work. We brought so many up. We've done so many this. And while they boast in other words, while they throw a cloak, okay, over, right, the defilement, it states, okay, and here we go again. Sorry, I just lost my page here. Cloak over the existing evil and excuse the great wickedness everywhere prevalent. Those who have a zeal for God's honor and love for souls will not hold their peace to obtain favor and duty. When I first came back to the church, and I spent several years as a professional athlete, and when I came back to the church, I was a great spokesman for the church, and so I was put in pedestals, and was because the athlete come back leaving for the Sabbath, grew up in the church and went away and came back. Great story, great draw for other people. And then I ran across this message, and I had to make a decision. I had to make a decision whether or not I was going to throw a cloak over the prevailing evil that I was seeing when I came back, or I was going to speak irrespective of what I was going to lose. And when I looked at what I, quote, lost, it is nothing compared to what, quote, I will gain. And so when we look at this, it states here, the ones that cannot hold their peace for the favor of any. Their righteous souls are vexed day by day with the unholy works and conversation of the unrighteous. They're powerless to stop the rushing torment of iniquity. And then, hence, they are filled with grief and alarm. They mourn before God to see religion despised in the very homes of those who have had great light. They lament and afflict their souls because pride, avarice, selfishness, and deception of almost every kind are in the church. Now, what happens is this. When we read these things, the very first thing people start saying, who defend, throw the cloak over, why aren't you talking about the good things the church is doing? Why do you always got to harp on the bad things? Why do you got to... And I'm like looking at this going, this is interesting, because all I'm doing is just reading what the prophet of God to the Seventh-Day Adventist Church laid before us. So, am I the one bringing this out? And as we lament our souls, it states, this is what's going to happen. The Spirit of God, which prompts to reproof, is trampled afoot. When we start talking about the very things that we see of mixed, and a simple thing, a lot of people go, what's the big deal? A simple thing is mixed foot washing. Touchy subject. Women washing men's feet, men's washing women's feet. But yet the Spirit of prophecy says God has given, by example, in the Bible, an example of a woman washing a man's feet. But the Spirit of prophecy states there is no examples given of a man washing a woman's feet. And so therefore we must be careful to follow the direct instructions of the Bible. And for some that may want to look that up, I am sure, we will be able to put that up on the screen, and you look it up, read it for yourself. So when we see these things happening in the church, we have the men washing on one side, the women washing on the side, and we have mixed couples washing on the other side. And we make statements about that. You should see the reaction that people give us. Why? Because we are talking, it says, when we prompt for reproof, it says it's trampled underfoot, while the servants of Satan triumph. God is dishonored, and the truth made of non-effect. Who's this class? In order, we're going to continue on. The class who do not feel grieved over their own spiritual. This is what's going to happen. The class who do not feel grieved over their own spiritual declension, or mourn over the sins of others, will be left without the seal of God. Is she talking about the Sabbath here? No, she's not. The Lord commissioned his messengers, the men with slaughtering weapons in their hands, go through after the city, and smite, let not your eyes spare, neither have ye pity. Slay utterly old, young, both maids and little children, and women. When God destroyed Achan, it was Achan, his wife, his family, the children, all that was destroyed. If we believe that God is a never-changing God, we need to ask ourselves a question. Will he have more mercy on us, being more sinful in our ways, than would he have on Achan in his sinful time, at his time, causing Israel to stumble? We need to ask ourselves that and stop excusing ourselves that we're doing a good work. Until we start mourning over our own spiritual loss, our own spiritual deprivement, and start realizing who we are, we will never receive the seal of God. If we cannot mourn over how we could help our brothers and save them from this death that is about to come, we will not receive the seal of God. It requires both to sigh for our own selves and to cry and lift up our voice and show the house of Jacob their sins. If we do not do those two things, Spirit of Prophecy is very clear. It states here that the Bible tells us that we will not receive the seal of God, because that is the seal of God and as regards to his truth. And now we continue on. It says, Then they began at the ancient men which were before the house. Now, the next portion of it in page 11, 211, is where it states who God is here talking about in our day, in our time. Here we see the church, hyphen, the Lord's sanctuary. So now, remember we said earlier, we read the Bible, and the Bible says about the sanctuary. Then they begin at my sanctuary, right? It states here we see the church, the Lord's sanctuary. So now it's clear which sanctuary is he talking about. The church today, the Seventh-Day Adventist Church, was the first to feel the stroke of the wrath of God. The ancient men were then on top, those whom God had given great light and who had stood as what? Guardians over the spiritual interests of the people, had betrayed their trust. They had taken the position that we need not look for miracles. Don't worry about what the Bible is saying in regards to these things. And the marked manifestation of God's power as in former days. God is not going to clean house like he did in Israel when he had brought the plagues upon the people, when he did all these things. Don't look for those things. Times have changed, they said. We're in a different time. This is more spiritual. Can't take those things as literally. These things are not going to literally happen. These words strengthen their unbelief. And they make it strengthen in the other people's too, he says. And he goes, the Lord will not do good, neither will he do evil. He's too merciful to visit his people in judgment. He's too merciful to visit the Seventh-Day Adventist people today. Are we going to wait for the time when the plagues are falling and all these other things, and God is going to deal with everybody else? But with us, right now in our way we are, God's not going to deal with us. We'll just get by. He says, these were strengthened their unbelief. And thus peace and safety is the cry from men who will never, from men who? From the ancient men, the elders, will never again lift up their voice. It says where they will what? Never again lift up their voice like the trumpet, show God's people their transgression, and the house of Jacob their sins. Remember, the house of Jacob is who? Israel. And we're asking, what are you reading from? We're reading from Testimonies for the Church, Volume 5. So we could see here, Testimonies for the Church, Volume 5, Pacific Press, page 2 We'll probably start from 207. 207 to this point 211. So we're sitting at 211 at this point that we're reading. Okay, and it continues on, and it states here, "Thus peace and safety is the cry for men who will never lift up their voice like a trumpet, to show God's people their transgression, the house of Jacob their sin." Listen to how she addresses them. And by the way, I got in a lot of trouble for making this quote one day, and a pastor got very offended. He says, "These dumb dogs that would not bark are the ones who feel the vengeance of an offended God. Men, maidens, and little children all perish together." And that's what it states. The abomination for which the faithful ones were sighing and crying were all that could be discerned by finite eyes. But by far the worst sins of those provoked the jealousy of the pure and holy God were unrevealed. And by the way, the ones that we're crying and sighing for, and the one that we're calling out, are the only ones that we see. But the one that provoked God the most is the one that we don't see. So you can imagine what God is talking about. Now, one of the things we're going to do is this. And we're looking at timelines here, okay? One of the things that I wanted to actually to go ahead and read, and I was hoping to let me see if I could get in there and get that up. And yes, and the quote that is from Isaiah, "The dumb dogs refuse to bark," Isaiah, and someone will place that up. As we were reading testimonies as well, testimonies, it continues on, and when it got down to testimonies 3 as testimonies, also another one that you should also read quickly as well too is Testimonies Volume 3, 266. And in that statement, it goes again and does the same thing. It goes and repeats it again in regards to this. And it says, "Those who receive the pure mark of truth, wrought in them by the power." And this is Testimonies to Ministers, Testimonies to Ministers, Volume 3, page 266 and 267. And I'll go here to... Sorry here, I'm just trying to click down on some things here. And it says here, and if somebody could put that up for me, please. It says Testimonies, Volume 3, page 266, 267. And it continues on, and it says here, "Those who receive the pure mark of truth, wrought in them by the power of the Holy Ghost, represented by a mark by the man in linen, are those that sigh and cry for the abomination shall be done in the church. Their love for purity and the honor of glory of God is such that they have so clear a view of exceedfulness of sin that they are represented as being in agony, even sighing and crying." And then it states, read the 9th chapter of Ezekiel. Why isn't this a subject that we talk about? This is why. In the case of Achan's sin, God said to Joshua, "Neither will I be with you anymore except you destroy the accursed thing from among you." How does this incident compare with those course pursued by those who will not raise their voice against sin and wrong, but whose sympathies are ever found with those who trouble the camp of Israel with their sins? God said God to Joshua, "Thou cannot stand before thine enemies till ye," what? "Take away the accursed thing from among you." We are trying to evangelize the world. That's what we say that we're trying to do. But from the study that we did last week with paradox, it shows that we're actually going back to Egypt. But there is a class that wants to evangelize the world. But the only way that's going to happen is that God must first what? Clean his house. For you cannot bring new wine into an old flask, for will not the old flask break and the new wine seep out? And how many times do we see this in our evangelist meeting? How many people do we baptize? And that's what we talk about. But have we ever stopped and count the numbers that actually leave